They walked into the mansion like royalty, heads high, voices louder than the chandeliers that swayed above them. The butler greeted them with respect, but their eyes darted past him until they landed on me, standing quietly near the dining hall, checking the setup before the guests arrived. Their smiles froze. One of them whispered, "Excuse me, we'd like to speak to the owner about this." The word "this" hung in the air like smoke. They weren't asking. They were demanding. Demanding an explanation for why someone like me was standing there, not serving drinks or opening doors. It was the kind of silence that tells you everything. And in that silence, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because life has a strange sense of irony. They had no idea who I was. No clue that the help they were about to humiliate was the owner of everything their eyes could see. But before we get there, before that moment when their pride turned to shame, let's rewind. Because this story didn't begin in a mansion. It began in a tiny two-room apartment that smelled like coffee and broken dreams. Back then, I wasn't the person standing tall in designer clothes. I was the one cleaning tables, serving water, and watching others live the life I could only imagine. People often assume success is about money or luck, but that's the part of the movie they walk in too late to see. They don't see the chapters filled with rejection letters, sleepless nights, or the humiliation that carves your confidence into stone. So when I stood in front of that family, watching their eyes fill with disgust, I didn't feel anger. I felt history repeating when only this time I held the power, because sometimes the universe doesn't give you revenge. It gives you a front-row seat to someone else's lesson. And trust me, when their lesson arrived, it was loud, poetic, and unforgettable. So how did I go from serving coffee to owning the entire estate they walked into? Let's rewind, back to the part where dreams cost everything and respect had to be earned the hard way. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments. Let's see how far our story travels. I wasn't born into wealth, not even comfort. I was born into noise, and the kind that never lets you dream too loud. Our apartment sat between a mechanic's shop and a liquor store in a forgotten corner of Detroit. Every night I fell asleep to engines roaring and arguments echoing through the thin walls. My mother worked double shifts at a diner. My father left when I was 10, but she used to say something that stayed with me. Don't let where you start decide where you finish. At the time, I didn't understand. I just thought she was trying to make struggle sound poetic. But now, I know she was planting armor. I loved numbers, not because they were easy, but because they made sense. People lie, emotions change, but numbers stay honest. I wanted to be a financial analyst. I pictured myself in a suit, presenting charts in a skyscraper office, earning applause instead of pity. College felt like my ticket out. I worked part-time at a coffee shop and studied business economics by night. There were weeks I ate instant noodles 3 times a day, but I didn't care. I was building something bigger than hunger. Then life, as it often does, changed the rules mid-game. My mother fell ill, heart failure. Her medical bills started piling up like a staircase I couldn't climb. I tried balancing work, studies, and hospital visits, but no human heart, and not even mine, could juggle that long. I dropped out. Not because I wanted to, but because survival demanded it. After she passed, I remember standing in that silent apartment surrounded by the hum of unpaid bills and fading memories. For the first time in my life, I had no plan. Just grief. Heavy, endless, paralyzing grief. That's when reality started teaching lessons no degree could. I worked at restaurants, cleaned offices, and took any shift that paid enough to keep the lights on. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from being invisible, when people walk past you like you're part of the furniture. One night, while cleaning an office building, I found a broken calculator in the trash. I took it home. It became my anchor, something that reminded me I was more than a janitor. I would punch random numbers into it before bed, pretending I was still running financial reports. Silly, maybe, but in a world that had taken everything, it kept a part of me alive. Months turned into years. I moved from job to job, waitress, cashier, housekeeper. Each role came with a uniform, and each uniform came with judgment. People saw fabric, not the person inside it. But here's the secret they never teach you. Every act of service shapes your patience, your pride, your perspective. I learned to observe people, the kind ones who left generous tips, and the cruel ones who threw coins as if feeding pigeons. I learned that respect wasn't tied to a paycheck. It was born from how you carry yourself when no one claps. Then came the moment everything truly fell apart. I had saved for months to start a small cleaning service of my own. A modest idea, but it was mine. I printed flyers, bought supplies, and landed my first contract, maintaining the guest houses of a real estate investor. For the first time, I felt control returning to my life. But just when things seemed to settle, my van, the one I used for work, was stolen. Everything inside it was gone. Cleaning equipment, supplies, paperwork, even the invoices I hadn't sent yet. It was like watching your only bridge burn from the middle. I sat on the curb that night, watching the flashing red lights of the police car, holding my head in my hands. That was my breaking point, or so I thought. But life has a way of pushing you right to the edge, only to show you how strong your grip can be. I didn't quit. I borrowed supplies, offered free trials to clients, and worked until my knees gave out. Every dollar I earned went straight back into the business. I named it Pure Touch Cleaning, not because it sounded fancy, but because it symbolized what I was trying to rebuild: purity of effort, clarity of purpose. Still, the struggle wasn't cinematic. There were nights I slept in my van, mornings I cried over spilled bleach ruining my only pair of shoes. But each tear, each scar, was an investment in resilience. Slowly, clients multiplied. One house turned into 3, 3 turned into 10. And one day, a wealthy developer hired me to clean his mansion for a private party. That mansion, with its marble floors and golden chandeliers, became the stage for everything that followed. It wasn't just another job. It was destiny, wrapped in irony, because when you've lived long enough as the help, you start recognizing the smell of arrogance before it enters the room, and that smell would soon lead to the moment they demanded to speak to the owner. The mansion job was supposed to be just another paycheck, another day of wiping away someone else's fingerprints while trying to leave no trace of my own. But fate doesn't always knock. Sometimes it slips in quietly while you're on your knees scrubbing a floor. It was a Friday afternoon when I met Mr. Donovan, a tall man in his 50s, suit pressed sharp enough to cut glass. He was a real estate developer, known in local papers as the man who builds dreams. To me, he just looked like another boss who wouldn't remember my name. But that day, something changed. He noticed how I organized his pantry, labels facing forward, everything arranged by date and type. He paused and said, almost surprised, "You did this?" I nodded. He smiled. "You've got an eye for order. Most people don't." It was a small compliment, but to someone who'd been invisible for years, it felt like sunlight after a long winter. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Donovan started asking for me specifically. He'd chat while I worked, sometimes asking about my cleaning methods, sometimes about business management. At first, I thought he was just being polite. But then he said something that stuck. "If you ever wanted to scale this little operation, I could show you how." That sentence changed everything. For the first time, someone saw potential in me, not pity, not charity, but genuine belief. He offered to mentor me on weekends, teaching me how contracts worked, how to bid for corporate cleaning deals, and how to manage finances like a real company. It felt like standing at the edge of a new world, one I'd only ever cleaned, never entered. I began learning fast, soaking up every lesson like water on dust. Soon, Pure Touch Cleaning wasn't just me in a bucket. I hired 2 assistants, then 4. We landed small offices, then boutique hotels. I was exhausted but alive in a way I hadn't been in years. But success has a way of drawing shadows. One of my new hires, Maya, a sharp-tongued woman in her 30s, started showing signs of envy. She was good at her job, but every time I earned a new client or praise, her smile tightened. At first I ignored it. I'd seen jealousy before. It fades if you don't feed it. But hers didn't fade. It evolved. She began whispering to others that I was getting special treatment from Donovan, that there was more than mentorship happening behind the scenes. It wasn't true, but rumors travel faster than truth, and soon some clients grew distant. Contracts paused. Calls went unanswered. Then one afternoon, I received an email from Donovan's assistant asking me to meet him, urgently. I walked into his office expecting business talk, but found two other men there, lawyers. Someone, anonymously, had accused me of financial misconduct. Fraud, they called it. Apparently, invoices under Pure Touch Cleaning had been altered, payments duplicated. It felt like a punch to the gut. I stood frozen, unable to breathe. I knew I hadn't done it, but proving innocence is always harder than claiming guilt. They suspended our contract pending investigation. Overnight, I lost 70% of my income. Employees left. Bills piled up. I sat in my car that night, parked outside the mansion that had once been my biggest client, staring at the glowing windows. Inside, they were hosting another elegant party, candles, laughter, music drifting into the night. Outside, I sat in silence, realizing that success was just as fragile as hope. For a week, I couldn't sleep. But then I remembered something Donovan once told me. Business isn't about never falling. It's about what you find on the ground when you do. So I started digging. I went through every invoice, every transaction. That's when I found it. One altered receipt from a private account. The signature wasn't mine. It was Maya's. She had rerouted payments into a fake vendor profile under a similar name. It was clever, almost perfect. Almost. I gathered everything, created a full report, and took it directly to Donovan's office. He looked shocked, but also ashamed. He apologized for believing the rumors, reinstated my contract, and quietly fired Maya. But something deeper shifted inside me that day. Trust, once broken, never returns the same. I realized that no mentor, no opportunity could protect me forever. If I wanted real power, I had to own it. Literally. That's when the idea hit me. Instead of cleaning mansions, why not buy one? Not to live in, but to build a luxury event business. The same clients who once handed me rags would soon pay for access to my space. It sounded insane. I had no capital, no investors. But insanity is where every great story begins. I applied for small business grants, pitched to local investors, even sold my car to fund the deposit on an old property outside the city. The process was brutal. Rejections, laughter, slammed doors. But every no became fuel. Months later, through sheer persistence and a few angels who believed in me, I signed the ownership papers. That abandoned mansion, the one people called the Winter Estate, was now mine. Renovations took everything I had: time, energy, savings, sanity. But as the walls brightened and the chandeliers returned to life, something else rose with them: my dignity. Within 2 years, the Winter Estate was hosting elite weddings, corporate retreats, charity galas, all under my management. The same upper-class families who once looked through me now smiled up to me. And that's when it happened. One family, elegant, loud, dripping with entitlement, arrived for a private event. They didn't recognize me, of course. To them, I was just another worker ensuring their comfort. But when they saw me standing near the grand dining table, not serving but overseeing, one of them frowned. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "We'd like to speak to the owner about this woman's presence." I smiled. The universe was about to serve them a lesson with a silver spoon. They stood in the grand hall of the Winter Estate as if it were built for them, backs straight, chins high, dripping in diamonds and disdain. The irony? The chandeliers they admired, the marble beneath their shoes, the air conditioning keeping them cool, all of it existed because of the very woman they were about to insult. I stood near the staircase, clipboard in hand, quietly observing the final checks before their event began. That's when one of them, a tall blonde woman with the kind of arrogance that fills a room before she does, turned to the manager and said, "Why is she standing here? Shouldn't the staff wait outside?" The manager froze, eyes flicking toward me. I smiled, calm and steady. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" She gave a small laugh, the kind that cuts deeper than a slap. Oh, nothing personal. We just prefer dealing directly with the owner. Her husband added, Yes, can you please call the owner? We'd like to discuss the guest arrangements. The room went quiet. My staff stood motionless, afraid to speak. I turned slightly toward the window, letting the sunlight hit the edge of my bracelet. The same bracelet I'd bought years ago from a thrift store to remind myself that shining doesn't require permission. Then I faced them again. Of course, I said softly. You're speaking to her. The woman blinked, then laughed, loud, sharp, disbelieving. I'm sorry, you're the owner? She gestured around the vast mansion. You must be joking. Her laughter spread among a few others, awkward and poisonous. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, long enough for their laughter to echo back at them. Then I handed her the event folder, embossed in gold with the logo of the Winter Estate by Pure Touch Holdings. My name was printed at the bottom. Her laughter stopped first. Her husband's smirk faded next, and one by one their expressions shifted from amusement to disbelief. To embarrassment, I didn't realize, she stammered. You just looked. I finished her sentence for her. Like the help? Her mouth opened, but no words came. I understand, I said gently, my voice calm but firm. You see people like you never do. You see uniforms, not stories. You see service, not sacrifice. You see what you expect, and ignore what you can't understand. Behind her, guests had started to notice the tension. A few whispered, others filmed discreetly on their phones. I took a deep breath. For years, I continued, I scrubbed floors just like these. Not because I lacked ambition, but because life demanded it. And every time someone looked at me like I didn't belong, I promised myself I'd build a place where everyone would. I stepped closer, not with anger, but authority. And now you're standing in it. The silence that followed was thick, the kind that bends time. Even the music from the ballroom faded as if the mansion itself wanted to listen. Then, with a shaky breath, the woman said, We didn't mean any disrespect. I nodded slowly. I know, that's the problem. You never mean it. It just comes naturally. Her husband tried to change the subject, asking about the dinner arrangements, but the crowd's energy had shifted. What began as an evening of luxury had turned into a living mirror, reflecting their prejudice, their privilege, their pride, and I didn't need to humiliate them further. Life had already done that for me. Beautifully, poetically, I turned to my staff. Please ensure our guests are comfortable, I said, and remind them, respect is always part of the service. Then I walked toward the terrace, the place where years ago I once stood as a cleaner, watching parties from the outside. Now I was hosting them. The cameras from local media had been there for a charity segment that evening, and by the next day, that short clip of the owner reveal went viral. Thousands of comments flooded in. Some praised the grace. Others admitted it made them rethink how they treat people in uniforms. But that wasn't what mattered most. That night, when the event finally ended, the same woman approached me again, alone, humbled, and quiet. She said, I'm sorry. I truly am. My father owned hotels, and I never once thought about the people who cleaned them. Until today. I nodded, not with victory, but understanding. Change, I told her, starts the moment you feel the shame you once caused. She left quietly, her head bowed. And as I stood under the soft glow of the chandeliers, the same ones I had cleaned years ago, I realized this wasn't revenge. It was restoration. It wasn't about proving I belonged. It was about creating a world where no one ever had to. Because the truth is, power isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout. It simply stands there, calm, unbothered, and lets arrogance collapse under its own weight. That night, as the last guests drove away and the music faded into the dark, I whispered to myself, You did it, Mom! You were right. Where we start doesn't decide where we finish. The next morning, I woke up not as the help, but as a woman who had finally helped herself. Dear audience, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to give it a like. It really helps. And share it with someone who believes kindness should always come before titles. The morning after that unforgettable night, the sun rose differently. It didn't just light up the mansion's marble floors, it blessed them, as if recognizing the journey that had brought her here. Ruth sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee, no longer rushing, no longer serving, just being. The city stretched below her, alive and awake, yet she felt a stillness inside her that she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in decades, there was no guilt, no exhaustion, no lingering need to prove herself. She had already done that, quietly, gracefully, and completely. The viral video had reached millions. People across the country wrote to her, hotel workers, janitors, young single mothers, and even CEOs, saying how her story reminded them that respect has no uniform. But Ruth didn't let fame rewrite her purpose. Instead, she built something even more powerful. 6 months later, she opened a training institute. Second Step. Its purpose was simple: to teach hospitality staff the business side of the industry so they could someday own their own hotels, restaurants, and event spaces. Every wall of the building told a story. Photos of cleaners turned managers, chefs turned entrepreneurs, maids turned mentors. She hired former staff from her old workplaces, the ones who once dreamed but never got the chance. And every morning, she began her day by saying the same words. Let's make sure no one ever has to apologize for where they started. Her son, Michael, now in college, would often visit and help manage the accounts. He once told her, "Mom, when they see me with your name, they don't see just a last name anymore. They see a legacy." It made her smile every time. Her community, too, changed. Where once people whispered about the maid who made it, they now spoke with pride. She built it herself, from nothing but grit and grace. The same mansion where she was once invisible now hosted charity galas for single mothers, scholarships for working women, and free financial literacy programs. The chandeliers still sparkled, but now they reflected purpose, not privilege. One evening, as she was locking up after an event, she found a young woman crying near the gate. The girl, a cleaner from a nearby hotel, said she was being mistreated and wanted to quit. Ruth listened silently, then handed her a business card. "Come by tomorrow," she said softly. "Let's talk about your next step." The girl hesitated. "But I don't have a degree." Ruth smiled. "Neither did I, until I built one, with my own name on the wall." That night, Ruth sat by her window again, staring out at the skyline. She thought of her younger self, tired, scared, wiping down tables and dreaming of a day like this. And she whispered, "You made it, not to escape your past, but to honor it." Her story wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting what success looks like, about showing the world that humility and power can live in the same heart. Years later, the Winter Estate became a national symbol of empowerment. High schools invited Ruth as a speaker. Magazines featured her as one of America's most inspirational entrepreneurs. But Ruth never changed. She still greeted her staff by name. She still polished a table when it wasn't clean. And she still smiled the same way, softly, like someone who knew the weight of every step that brought her here. One day, during a live interview, the host asked, "If you could say one thing to that family who once demanded to speak to the owner, what would it be?" Ruth paused, then looked straight into the camera. "I'd thank them," she said, "because sometimes it takes someone doubting you for you to remember who you are." The audience erupted in applause. And in that moment, she realized her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to every unseen worker, every underpaid dreamer, every woman who had been told she was just something. Ruth didn't retire rich. She retired fulfilled. Her home wasn't a palace. It was peaceful. Her walls weren't lined with gold. They were lined with laughter. And when she walked into a room now, people didn't just notice her. They felt her presence. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was undeniable. Thanks for watching. If Ruth's story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because every time we lift one person up, we raise the world a little higher. They once called her just the help. But the truth, Ruth was never helping them. She was helping herself climb out of a life the world said she belonged in. Every floor she mopped was a step closer to freedom. Every insult she swallowed was an investment in her strength. And every night she went home exhausted. She was still richer in dignity than those who looked down on her. They thought she was invisible. They thought her silence meant weakness. But her silence was strategy, the kind only people who've suffered in silence understand. And when the time came, that silence spoke louder than their privilege ever could, because Ruth didn't just expose corruption. She exposed a mindset, one that measures worth by titles and suits, not truth and soul. And that's the real twist. She never needed revenge. She needed recognition, and now the world gives her that every single day. Years later, a scholarship appeared at her old university, the Ruth Carter Foundation for Resilient Women. It funded education for single mothers chasing second chances. The first recipient? A young woman named Elaine Winters, the daughter of one of those arrogant family members who once demanded to speak to the owner. Fate has a sense of humor, doesn't it? Because sometimes the very people who try to break you end up sending their children to the world you built. Ruth never gloated. She never needed to. She simply kept moving forward, graceful, grounded, and glowing in her quiet triumph. So the next time you walk past someone sweeping floors, serving tables, or carrying trays, don't look through them. Look at them. Because you might just be looking at a future CEO, a visionary, a story that hasn't been written yet. Because power doesn't always enter with a suit. Sometimes it enters with a mop and a dream, and the people who laughed at her story, they'll be telling it someday, not as a joke but as a lesson. So tell me, who are you underestimating today? Because if Ruth's story taught us anything, it's this. Respect isn't given to power. Power grows from respect. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true-life stories that remind us. Greatness often begins where no one is looking.